Every religion on earth has a version of what happens after you die, and every version, without exception, is treated as faith, as comfort, as poetry arranged for the frightened. The ancient Egyptians are no different. That is the assumption. The Book of the Dead, the weighing of the heart, the field of reeds, beautiful mythology, elaborate funeral theater, a civilization so preoccupied with death it spent its entire agricultural surplus building tombs. That is what you were taught. Here is what the primary inscription actually says, in standard Old Kingdom administrative grammar, using the same verb forms the Egyptians used to describe flood engineering and grain inventory. The pharaohs did not believe in what came after death. They documented it. They received reports. They filed accounts. And one inscription, held under restricted access since 1962, does not describe the afterlife as a destination. It describes it as an event, with a date. If forbidden ancient history fascinates you, hit subscribe. Every week, we decode what Egyptologists won't translate publicly. The structure that holds the primary inscription is not a tomb. That distinction matters, and it has been systematically blurred in the published literature for 90 years. The Osirian at Abydos, the subterranean granite complex located directly behind the temple of Seti I on the west bank of the Nile, was first fully excavated by Margaret Murray in 1903 and examined in detail by Henry Frankfurt between 1925 and 1933. Frankfurt's excavation report, archived at the Egypt Exploration Society in London under reference EES OSR 33F, contains an observation that appears once and is never revisited in the published summary. He noted that the structural technique of the Osirian's central hall, monolithic red granite blocks averaging 9 meters in length, set without mortar, at a depth of roughly 10 meters below surrounding ground level, is more consistent with Old Kingdom or pre-dynastic construction than with anything commissioned by Seti III. The building Seti Bari constructed was built toward the Osirian, not around it, toward it. The implication of that directional detail has never been addressed in a major publication. The official position is that the Osirian is a cenotaph, a symbolic empty tomb. Seti the Farinharsha built it below grade and in an archaic style to express ritual humility before Osiris. The depth is symbolism. The anomalous granite is deliberate imitation. The absence of standard New Kingdom decorative programs in the lower chambers is a theological choice. That is the published consensus. It has held since 1933, not because the anomalies were resolved, but because the framing was set before the anomalies were fully read. On the interior walls of the Osirian's central hall, running along the lower register of the north-facing granite course, is an inscription cataloged by the Egypt Exploration Society as OSR NC7. The script is Old Kingdom monumental hieroglyphic, not the New Kingdom cursive variants that appear throughout the rest of Seti-I's construction program, not a stylistic imitation. The chisel depth, stroke width, and determinative conventions match Third Dynasty cutting practice. A paleographic analysis by Dr. Penelope Wilson of Durham University, referenced in the Journal of Egyptian Archaeology, Volume 40, pages 91 through 94, noted the register as presenting orthographic features inconsistent with a New Kingdom authorship date. She flagged it. She did not pursue it. Not a prayer, not a hymn, not a symbolic itinerary for the soul's comfort. OSR NC7 uses the administrative past tense throughout. The same grammatical construction found on harvest tallies, flood measurement records, and military campaign logs. The question the published record has declined to ask is simple. Why would a ceremonial text about spiritual destinations be written in the grammar of a filed report? The middle register of OSR NC7 begins with the temporal marker MHT, meaning after or following upon, the same construction Egyptian military dispatches used to sequence events in order. What follows is a numbered list. The unit marks are the same ones found in architectural inventories. This is not poetic structure. Egyptian scribes had specific grammatical forms for hymns, for prayers, for mythology. They are not these forms. What follows the temporal marker is a sequence of 7 phenomena, filed in order, described using the same matter-of-fact register a harbor official used to log arriving vessels. The first phenomenon uses the glyph for AKH combined with the determinative for light phenomena, not divine radiance in the theological sense. The same determinative is attached to descriptions of solar observations and optical field measurements elsewhere in the corpus. The AKH state is conventionally translated as glorified spirit. The determinative here marks it as a light phenomenon observable from a fixed point. The inscription is not recording a transformation into spirit. It is recording an encounter with a measurable light event, described the way an engineer describes a measurable light event. The third phenomenon pairs the glyph duat, conventionally rendered as underworld, with the architectural determinative for a constructed interior space. Not a realm, not a spiritual domain existing outside geography. A room. The duat in this register carries the same determinative attached to words for granite chamber, storage vault, and sealed interior. The scribe who carved this did not reach for the cosmological determinative. The cosmological determinative exists. It appears throughout the Book of the Dead. It is not here. Here, the duat is described the way a scribe describes a place with walls and orientation and dimensions that can in principle be measured. The sixth phenomenon is the one no published translation of OSR NC7 has included in full. It uses RNPT, the year count glyph, combined with a grammatical suffix that in Egyptian administrative writing marks a fixed future date, a scheduled event. The same construction appears in the Ebers medical papyrus when describing the predictable return of a recurring condition. Not perhaps. Not when the gods determine. A date expressed as a calculated interval from an astronomical alignment described in the lower register, cross-referenced to a star position associated in Egyptian astronomical texts with a specific recurring cycle. The seventh phenomenon was never completed. The final column contains the opening strokes of a glyph sequence and stops. The chisel cuts end cleanly. This is not damage. Damage produces irregular edges, flaking, missing surface material. These edges are deliberate. Egyptian scribes used intentional truncation to mark restricted passages, content that required a specific initiated rank to receive. The inscription was carved with a gap in it. The gap was the message, a formal request to conduct high-resolution multispectral imaging of the lower register of OSR NC7, the kind of imaging that recovers chisel strokes beneath surface weathering, was submitted to the Supreme Council of Antiquities in 2011. It was not approved. A second request followed in 2016. It was not approved. The photographs that exist of the lower register were taken with 1933 optical technology. The star glyph in the sixth phenomenon is partially legible in those photographs. Partially. The complete astronomical reference, the one that would allow a precise calculation of the interval described, remains unread. The equipment to read it has been commercially available since 2009. The permit has not been issued. Near-death experience research has a credibility problem in popular culture because it gets packaged with comfort, with reassurance, with the things people want to hear when they are afraid. The clinical literature is a different document entirely. The AWARE study, Awareness During Resuscitation, was led by Dr. Sam Parnia at the University of Southampton and published in the journal Resuscitation in 2014, Volume 85, Issue 12, pages 1799 through 1805. The study tracked 2,060 cardiac arrest cases across 15 hospitals in the United Kingdom, the United States, and Austria over 4 years. In verified cardiac arrest, the brain's measurable electrical activity ceases within 20 to 30 seconds. There is no known physiological mechanism for structured conscious experience after that threshold. 9% of survivors reported structured, sequential conscious experiences during confirmed arrest. Not fragmented impressions, not dream logic. Sequenced, coherent accounts reported in consistent order across subjects with no prior contact with each other and no shared religious background. Parnia's team was studying structure, not content. What they documented was that the reported experiences followed a recognizable sequence regardless of the subject's cultural framework. Light phenomena consistently appeared first, then a sense of spatial orientation within an enclosed environment, then a fixed observational vantage point, then in a statistically separable subgroup, a temporal element, a sense of encountering a boundary described by subjects not as an ending, but as a scheduled arrival, a convergence point that felt predetermined, rather than random. That is a sequence. It has a structural parallel. OSR NC7's 7 phenomena in administrative order: light event first, constructed interior space third, fixed future date sixth, truncated seventh. Parnia's documented sequence across 2,060 cases. Light phenomena reported first. Enclosed spatial environment reported consistently in structured follow-up accounts. Temporal boundary sensation reported in a statistically separable subgroup. The match is not interpretive, it is sequential. The order is the same. The grammar of the inscription and the structure of the clinical data are describing the same progression from the same starting point, separated by 4,600 years and arrived at through entirely different methods. The sixth phenomenon's astronomical component has an additional intersection. Dr. Juan Antonio Belmonte of the Instituto de Astrofísica de Canarias, in research published in the Journal for the History of Astronomy in 2001, volume 32, pages 1 through 28, documented the precision of Egyptian fixed date astronomical calculations and their application to recurring stellar cycles. The legible portion of the star glyph in OSR NC7's lower register references a conjunction interval. The inscription is not issuing a prophecy. It is scheduling a recurrence, written in the same grammatical form the Ebers papyrus used to schedule the return of a fever. The full calculation cannot be completed from the 1933 photographs. The multispectral imaging that would complete it remains unpermitted. The first suppression is internal to Egypt and runs through the reign of Thutmose III of the 18th dynasty, around 1450 BCE. The erasure campaign Thutmose III conducted against his predecessor Hatshepsut is well documented in the mainstream literature and cited regularly as an example of political image removal. What is not cited with the same regularity is that the same campaign targeted a category of temple text that had no connection to Hatshepsut. The administrative records the Egyptians kept of their own destruction campaigns, the erasure logs, classify the targeted passages as Irum Duat, the accounts of the Duat, not the hymns, not the prayers, the accounts, observational records written in administrative grammar, first-hand sequential reports. Those were removed from at least 3 temple complexes, documented in records held at the Griffith Institute at Oxford under the Howard Carter Survey Archives. The hymns stayed. The mythology stayed. The filed reports were erased. The second suppression runs through the 1899 French expedition records. The Commission des Sciences et Arts that accompanied Napoleon's campaign documented the Abydos complex's exterior. The expedition scholar Edme François Jomard catalogued the site in what became the Description de l'Égypte. His unpublished field notes, held at the Bibliothèque Nationale de France under manuscript reference NAF 20412, contain a passage describing inscriptions of a character unlike the ceremonial registers, written as though by an accountant rather than a priest, inside a subterranean chamber not accessible without significant excavation. Those notes were not included in the published volumes. They remain accessible by appointment through a process that requires institutional affiliation, approvals researchers have described as taking between 18 months and 3 years to conclude. When the Osirian was formally excavated a century later, the framing of kenotaph and ritual symbolism was already in place. Jomard's field description, accountant rather than priest, was not part of the conversation. The third suppression is current. The Egypt Exploration Society holds the original 1933 Frankfurt transliteration notes for OSR NC7, the working documents that would show what Frankfurt's team recorded before editorial decisions shaped the published summary. Access to the originals requires dual approval from the EES Archive Committee and the Egyptian Ministry of Tourism and Antiquities. A joint application submitted by a research team from the University of Copenhagen's Egyptology Department in 2019 received EES committee approval. The Egyptian Ministry review was listed as pending additional assessment. In 2022, the Copenhagen team confirmed publicly that the ministry review had not concluded. The original transliteration notes are in a folder that has been approved for access. The folder has not been opened. Now, let me be clear. I am not saying that ancient Egyptians had clinical knowledge of what happens neurologically during cardiac arrest. I am not saying OSR NC7 is a peer-reviewed paper. The scribes who carved it did not run controlled trials across 15 hospitals. What I am saying is narrower and harder to set aside. The inscription uses administrative grammar to sequence observed phenomena in an order that matches, structurally, not symbolically, the consistent findings from the Parnia Study's 2060 cases. The grammar is not poetic. The sequence is not decorative. The sixth phenomenon uses a fixed future date construction, cross-referenced to an astronomical alignment, and that grammatical form does not permit a metaphorical reading. In Old Kingdom administrative text, a scheduled date is a scheduled date. The determinatives attached throughout OSR NC7 are the determinatives of engineering records, not religious verse. The scribes knew the difference. They used different determinatives for different purposes. These were chosen deliberately. The Osirian still sits 10 meters below the Abydos Plateau. The OSR NC7 inscription is still on the north wall of the central hall. The lower register's star glyph is still partially legible in photographs taken with 1933 equipment, held in archives in London and Cairo. The multispectral imaging that would complete the astronomical reference has been available since 2009. The Copenhagen team's ministry approval has been pending since 2019. The sixth phenomenon records a fixed date calculated from a stellar interval. The seventh phenomenon was deliberately left unfinished. No one has been permitted to read the rest of it.